Welcome to this lecture in the series on the Tiger Tank. My name is Bruce Oliver Newsome, and these are the lectures on the Tiger Tank. And in this lecture, we're going to answer a question from the audience. And I invite questions about the Tiger Tank, so please contact me. Please use the contact details on this slide. This slide will be repeated at the end of the lecture, and that is true for all the lectures. So the contact details slide will be at the beginning of each lecture and the end of each lecture. And I would like you to communicate with me with comments on lectures that have been posted, and also give me ideas for future lectures. And often the best way to pose that idea is as a question. So think about what questions you have about the Tiger Tank and just send that straight to me, and I will do my best to answer it. So in this lecture, we're going to answer a question about the main armament. And the question was posed to me as, how big was the main armament? So we could answer this question simply as the caliber. So the caliber was 88 millimeters. The gun was known as the 88. But there are other parameters. So caliber is only one parameter for any gun, and tank guns should be considered by several measures, and even in combinations, the most appropriate combinations of measures. And we should also consider the perception of the tank for its time. So how was it perceived when it was introduced and in comparison to other tank guns? We're going to make those perceptual comparisons and the technical comparisons. And there are many tank guns to consider because the Tiger Tank has a uniquely long period of service, unmodified in its armament. So it gets to fight many other forms of tank gun for the best part of 3 years, the final 3 years of the Second World War. So let's go back to the beginning of the story of the gun itself. So the 88 starts as the Flak 18. The Germans have had previous 88s, so they've had anti-aircraft 88 millimeter guns all the way back to the First World War. They introduced a new version in the mid-1930s, and it comes to the attention of Germany's neighbors in 1937 when Germany deploys it to the Spanish Civil War, and they demonstrate its capabilities as both an anti-aircraft gun and as an anti-ground target gun during that war. So it's pretty well known by the Second World War. Its specifications are essentially known complete by the Second World War. And the Western Allies get to fight it for themselves from May 1940 in France. And then Britain gets to fight it most often because it gets deployed in March 1941 in North Africa with the German intervention in Libya. And that campaign in North Africa goes on for another couple of years. So the British in particular and their Western allies in North Africa, they get to fight the 88 over and over again. And it is the scourge of British tanks throughout that period, as well as of aircraft. So the British know it very well. They don't have much of an answer to it. They certainly capture lots of examples. So this photograph shows one of those captures. This is a Flak 18, lots of kill rings around its barrel on a burnt out trailer which is being towed by a burnt out tractor. And the gun itself is probably fine. It probably operates fine, even though the mounting may be a little damaged by fire. Now in September 1942, the British intercept their first signal that specifies Tiger tanks. Now the context of the signal is it's coming from Europe, German headquarters in Europe to a German headquarters in Africa concerning the prospective deployment of Tiger tanks to Africa. Now the British have had intelligence about Panzer VIs before, but they actually turn out to be false. So this is the first intercepted intelligence on the real Tigers. And that signal includes some bare specifications, including the caliber of the main armament. So it says 88 millimeters. And the British correctly infer that the tank gun is probably some development of this Flak gun. However, the users don't know about this. So the high level of signals intelligence here, known as strategic intelligence or ultra, it's coded as ultra, it is not routinely distributed around beyond 30 Britons at home in Britain, and they decide that it's not going to get distributed for several months, in fact, as it turns out, to the users on the front line. So Western Allied users remain ignorant about the Tigers, and they thence remain ignorant about the 88 in the Tiger, and that explains why their perceptions of the first Tigers are highly subjective. And they use similes such as a telephone pole or a telegraph pole. So here's a great example from Captain Wilbur Hatcher. There's a US M3 light tank company commander in Tunisia. He sees his whole company wiped out by Tiger tanks on the 10th of December. And he is struck by many things about the tanks he's looking at, in particular the guns that he compares to long telephone poles. Now, he has not received any intelligence about Tiger tanks. He actually mistakes the tanks he's looking at as Panzer IVs. And he's only 100 yards away from them. So his tank is knocked out. He dismounts. He's 100 yards away from the Tiger tanks, and he's trying to direct his other M3 light tanks against the Tigers. He's able to do this at such a short range because there's lots of smoke, there's low cloud and rain, and the visibility is very poor. But even though he's at that close range, he doesn't realize that these are Tiger tanks. He does realize, however, that they have very big guns and they seem very large to him, but he thinks they're Panzer IVs. Now there's another comparison, same simile. This comes from Brigadier Paul Robinett, who is in command of Combat Command B, which is a brigade echelon formation of the US 1st Armored Division in Tunisia. So he is the ultimate boss of Hatcher back in December. Now Robinett himself doesn't get to see Tiger tanks, and he actually doesn't even realize that Hatcher has faced Tiger tanks. He doesn't get to see that, Robinett doesn't get to see real Tiger tanks until April of 1943, and that's when Combat Command B gets transferred from the southern end of the front to the northern end, and it goes through Hunt's Gap, which has been a battle site in March between attacking German forces and British defenders. And the Germans withdraw, demolishing 7 Tiger tanks. And those demolished tanks survive on the road and alongside the road, and Robinett gets to see them as he transfers his command up the road to the north, and actually some of his forces camp along the road. The tanks are demolished, but the guns always survive. They survive complete even if they're blown out of the tank. So he sees the gun for the first time and he says, it looks like a telegraph pole. It's the same simile. And we can get the same simile from British users who get to see Tiger 131 as they're preparing for the invasion of Normandy in June of 1944. So this quote comes from Lieutenant Boscawen of the Coldstream Guards. He is a newbie to combat, but he's a privileged officer because he's one of the few who gets to see Tiger 131 in Britain before the invasion of Normandy. Tiger 131 was captured in late April of 1943 in Tunisia. It's the first complete running Tiger to be captured in the West, and it's shipped back to Britain for analysis, and it's shown off to a few lucky officers before the invasion of Normandy. Boscawen is one of them. Now he looks at the Tiger 131 and he says in his diary, he found the deadly 88mm in the turret quite startling. Well, he would, because he's commanding a Sherman tank with a 75mm gun, which is close in caliber, but a lot shorter. It's quite obvious to him there's a huge discrepancy in size. To continue to watch the whole video, go to patreon.com/Bruce Oliver Newsome.